Hey everyone, welcome back to this final part of my video series on making my Armies on Parade board for this year. So in the first couple of parts we saw me sort of visualize and then build the board, and then in this final part we'll go through the painting process. I'm not at all an expert in painting terrain, and I found it quite tricky, but I just sort of experimented with a bunch of techniques, and hopefully I think it came out really well. So I started off with some really cheap black spray paint and painted the whole board with this. Next I brought out these airbrush paints, so there's like a grey, blue, a light grey and then a white. And I started with a sort of grey blue and put it in most of the places on the board on the ground. So I wanted to cover most of the black up but still leave kind of some black in places to make it more interesting. And then after that I repeated the process with the lighter grey and the white to just sort of highlight everything and give it some depth. This is the model that I need to match the bases of for this board, so I tested out a couple of different paints, a sort of a green ink and a contrast paint on the board to see which one would match closest, and I ended up going with the contrast paint Pterodon Turquoise, which when sprayed through the airbrush over this like pre-shade looks really good, and I've used it to highlight most of the sort of white areas. The ground has a nice varied colour. So I used Rakarth Flesh as the main base coat colour for all of the stone. I really like Rakarth Flesh for stone and for other things like that. Like I've used it for skeletons as well. I think it gives a really nice base tone to use underneath a lot of contrast paints, which is what I'm going to be using here. So I just painted all of the stone and like cliff and flagstone areas with Rakarth Flesh, as well as painting the building. So I also used Rakarth Flesh to paint the trees, and I kind of dry brushed this on instead of getting a solid base coat, because I'm going to use some contrast paints through the airbrush, and when you do that it kind of just tints the surface, so it's good to have some variation in your colour. So with the base coating done, the next step is to start painting in some details, and I'm mostly using contrast paints for these as well. So I used brown contrast paint to paint the wood, and then I started using Skeleton Horde to shade all of my stone. When I was painting all of the stone, I used Skeleton Horde as well as these contrast paints in sort of random splodges to give all of the stone variation rather than it all being one standard like tan colour. Next I used a dark brown contrast paint in the airbrush, thinned down to go over all of the trees, and because we have that dry brush on the base coat of the trees, it gives them a nice variation, and I also varied the intensity of the brown in places to give the trees more variation. So here's what the board looks like after all of the washes have been done, and the next stage is going to be to highlight that using some dry brushes. So I mostly used Wraithbone to dry brush over the board using a big makeup brush with a bunch of Wraithbone on it. I went over all of the stone, some of the ground, and the other areas as well. The only thing I didn't use Wraithbone for was the trees. For the trees I used Baneblade Brown as a dry brush, which is just slightly different from Wraithbone, so it made this trees stand out slightly differently. So now I'm done with most of the painting steps for the boards, and you can see that the terrain is painted fairly simply. There's not loads and loads of detail on all of the pieces, and that is kind of deliberate, because when you're making a board for gaming or for display, you don't want the terrain to like take away from your models. So the final step is to add some flowers and tufts to the board. I have a variety of colours of flowers and some grass to use here, and the trick I think to getting this to look realistic is to not put just the flowers everywhere, but to keep them into like the lower areas and the gaps where terrain pieces meet, and around other foliage areas and plant areas, and what I did with the flowers was make sure to always keep them together where grass is, not just anywhere, so there isn't flowers everywhere. And so with that, the board is finished, and so I just set up quickly my Cursed City collection on it for now so that we can take some shots. hope you enjoyed that video. Like I said before, I had a lot of fun making this board. It's a bit different to any other project that I've done before, even my previous Armies on Parade, which you might have seen. Although the theme is quite similar, the actual techniques and the execution on this board is quite different from that one, much more like ground cover. So yeah, but I really enjoyed it, and it's really cool that the board is Warcry size as well, so I can play Warcry on it. I just need to find a place to store it now. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this series, please let me know if you enjoyed the sort of project log style rather than the little one-offs. I got a bunch of other videos planned, so please do subscribe. And I wanted to just take this opportunity. It's the first video I filmed since my Kill Team video came out, and I just wanted to thank everyone for the absolutely phenomenal reaction that video had. It's had over 3,000 views, which I thought was just beyond my wildest dreams for anything that I'm making on this channel. It's just obviously a small channel for fun to document my hobby projects. So thank you so much for watching that video and enjoying it and liking it and commenting on it. I cannot get over how well people like those models. So yeah, thank you for watching this one, and thank you for watching all of my other videos and supporting the content that I've been doing. It's really appreciated, and I'm really enjoying showing off different aspects of my hobby.